The Legionnaires of Omega Company were never too busy to sample the entertainments of 2 Galaxy-class amusement parks. The officers were also pleased to be free of the corrupting influences to which the troops had been exposed on their previous assignment. Not that many of them could have become much more corrupt than they already were. Without much question, Landor was the healthiest place the company had been. Relatively speaking, of course. Sushi stared at his computer, which currently displayed a long list of names, a list that very few eyes other than his had seen. If some of those on the list had known just who was looking at it and why, there would have been interplanetary repercussions. One of those repercussions would have undoubtedly have been a serious attempt to liquidate Sushi. Sushi knew this, of course. It didn't bother him. It was just the downside of the gamble he was taking. Taking over the Yakuza. It had seemed a ridiculous idea when he'd first come up with it, and inspired improvisation to save his hide when the Japanese mob had sent an assassin to punish him for impersonating one of its members. If he'd thought it all the way through when he first came up with it, he might have decided on something less audacious. After all, he already had what was supposed to be a full-time job, although being a Legionnaire in Omega Company, even under Captain Jester, was a good bit less demanding than belonging to most military units. But running this conspiracy was more than a full-time job. The basic idea was simple. He'd invented a phony superfamily that would unite the families on different worlds, allowing them to mediate territorial disputes and to trade useful information. It was an idea whose time had come a good while back, only the inherent conservatism of the criminal mentality had kept it from coming into being. But he'd done it, essentially with no help from anyone except a few of his own family members who had certain useful knowledge and contacts and had used them to slip him information. And it had worked. The only problem so far was that the entire superfamily consisted of Sushi and his trusty computer, a Legion mil-spec model, but with lots of custom features installed by Sushi himself. Eventually, he was going to make a mistake, and he just had to hope it wouldn't be a fatal one, especially not to himself. It was probably a shortcoming in a would-be criminal mastermind, but he really didn't want anybody to get hurt if he could avoid it. He didn't even really want to pocket more than a tiny fraction of the Yakuza's income. The whole idea originally had been to keep himself alive, and he'd been perfectly happy if he could continue to achieve that goal over the long term, say 7 or 8 decades. Behind him, a door opened, and almost by instinct he blanked the screen. Then a familiar voice said, "Yes, Sush. Oki tells me Dunes Park has a new coaster. Want to go give it a test?" Sushi looked over his shoulder to see Duop standing hip-shot in the doorway of their shared room in the Landor Plaza Hotel. "Maybe tomorrow," said Sushi wearily. "Right now, I'm up to my ears in this project." "Aw, come on," said Duop. "You've been busting your hump on that stuff all week. Time for a break, man." "Believe me, I'd love to take one," said Sushi. "But this business of taking over the Yakuza is a lot more work than I expected. It wasn't really that hard to get control, but keeping it is turning out to be real work." "And your ass is grass if it gets away from you," said Duop, nodding in sympathy. "Right. I've got the families in the sector around Old Earth playing along with me," said Sushi, leaning back in his chair and stretching. "They recognize the need for a larger organization, and they aren't picky about who's running it, as long as it doesn't cut their profits. That's the good part." He paused, then added, "At least there is a good part." "Can't be all that good if it don't leave you time to goof off," said Duop, sulking. "You're starting to act like a freaking officer." "Who, me? Watch your mouth," said Sushi with an indignant expression. "If I'd wanted to be an officer, I'd have had my father buy me a commission and gone to the academy." Duop slouched against the doorway and crossed his arms. "All I know is what I see," he said. "You'd think now that we're in the theme park business, we'd get a chance to go on a ride or two. But no, this whole Yazuka thing has you tied up hand and foot." "Yakuza," corrected Sushi. "Look, I'm sorry. I really have to finish this report, okay? Why don't you get somebody else to go along on the new rides with you this time?" "Like who?" asked Duop. "Tuscanini would go along for the ride, but what are we going to talk about while we're waiting online? He'd just pull out a book and start reading." "You could take Mahatma or the Gambolts," said Sushi, looking up distractedly. "Sure, except they'd have to cut out of training, which they wouldn't do. I tell you, Sush, this new generation of Legionnaires is going straight down the tubes. Ain't a single one of them that really appreciates the fine points of goofing off." Sushi chuckled. "I suppose not."